Today's Torah portion is Parshas Devarim, and this week's Torah portion, this Shabbos has a special name. It's called the Shabbos Chazon, the Shabbos of vision. And the name comes, on a very technical sense, comes from the opening words of the Haftorah, which comes from Isaiah chapter 1, verses 1 through 27. The Chazon Yeshayahu ben Amos, the vision of Isaiah, Asher Chazal Yehuda v'Yerushalayim. He had this vision about Judah and Jerusalem, and the essence of the Torah can be encapsulated in the second verse of this verse of Isaiah, where it says, "Shimu Shemayim Hazini Eretz, listen, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, Ki Hashem diber, because God has spoken. Banim gidalti v'romamti, children have I raised and exalted, Vehem pashubi, but they rebelled against me." And it's about how the Jewish people have rebelled against God. But the vision of Isaiah does end in a positive manner, because it says, "Ashiva shaftayach kvarishana, I will return your judges as in the earliest times, v'yotzayach kvatchila, and your counselors like the beginning." And then once again, Jerusalem will be called, Jerusalem will once again be called Irat Tzedek Kiryon Emana. It will be called the city of righteousness, a city of faith. And then it states, verse 27, Zion b'mishpat tipadeh, v'shaveh b'tzedakah. Zion shall be redeemed with justice, and her returnees with righteousness. Meaning to say that the way to gain redemption is through mishpat, justice, and tzedakah, and righteousness. So this is the vision of Isaiah, which we read, and it's always read the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. And this is part of the reason why this Shabbos is called the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. It's called the Shabbos of vision. That even though we're mourning for the destruction, it's the Shabbos where we read the Shabbos of the vision of Isaiah, where he says, yes, I view that the temple, that the northern kingdom of Israel will be exiled, but yet we will be redeemed. Sion b'mishpat, the mishpat tipadeh, that Jerusalem will be redeemed through justice, utzedakah, vishaveh b'tzedakah, and its returnees with charity, with righteousness. But even though that's the technical reason why it's called the Shabbos of Vision, the Rebbes give other explanations. So the Sadigora Rebbe says as follows: that tzaddikim used to say that this Shabbos that we called the Shabbos of Vision, is a great Shabbos. It's maybe the greatest Shabbos of all the Shabbos of the year. This specific week is the greatest Shabbos of all the Shabbosos of the year. Why is that the case? Because when you take a little bit of light and you put it in a dark place, then the light is the most beloved of all. Meaning to say, it's like the hidden light, which comes into a place of total darkness. You all of a sudden appreciate the light. You run towards the light. When everything is light, you don't notice the light. That's just reality. So therefore, this Shabbos comes during the period, excuse me, that's even more intense than the period of the 3 weeks. It's the period known as the 9 days leading up to Tisha B'Av. It's not only that, this period starts off the most intense period of communal mourning of the whole year, the Shavua Shachabo, the week of Tisha B'Av. So therefore, these days are days of darkness and lowliness and descent and truly humbling days for the Jewish people. But when the light of Shabbos comes, then all of a sudden we appreciate this light so much. And a lot of people, I know, I've seen rabbis who have the custom, even though during the 9 days, and especially the week of Tisha B'Av, you're not allowed to eat meat. On Shabbos, you're allowed to eat meat. So they have the custom to eat the meat at Shalosh Shudas on this week. So you feel that because you can eat meat. So you feel all of a sudden that major gap between Shabbos, where it's celebration, every moment of Shabbos is celebratory, and then we go straight from there into the darkness of the week of Tisha B'Av. And so therefore, when the light of Shabbos comes, it's so much appreciated and beloved. And that's why it states how great, it says in Tehillim 31, how great is your goodness that you have hidden for those who fear you. Meaning to say that in the exile, the good is always going to be hidden and covered up. And so therefore, in the sense that we can't see it properly, but in the future, then the good will be redeemed and will be taken out from amongst the hidden. And so therefore, these days of the 3 weeks that are the period from Shabbat Sabar Tammuz till Tisha B'Av, when the light of Shabbos comes, it reveals the hidden things. And so therefore, that's what Shabbos does. So the rest of the 3 weeks is a time of darkness. When comes along Shabbos, and all of a sudden, everything is revealed and beloved. And that's why the Shabbos Chazon is in some ways the most beautiful Shabbos of all, because it's the Shabbos where all of a sudden we appreciate the light, because of the rest of the week is darkness. And it's also brought down in the holy writings that the day of Shabbos, meaning to say, it's brought down in the holy writings that, hold on one second, just give me one second.
Rabbi, I can't hear you. Are you on mute?
Okay, yeah. Thank you. So I'm sorry about that. I appreciate you reminding me so sensitively. Thank you. So there's a way to remember something. It's called the siman. It's called atbash. So this is the mnemonic. We were talking about this morning. Thera was there. We are talking about there are certain mnemonics that they teach you when you're a young student in the yeshiva, and you remember them. So one of them is called atbash. What does that mean? Aleph stands for the first day of Pesach. So it's the same day as the first day of Pesach. That day will also be the first day of Tisha B'Av. So since Tisha B'Av this year is on a Monday night, so we can already prepare for your Seder. If you want to invite your sister, your brother, your uncle, tell them Tisha B'Av this year will be a Monday night. Tell them Pesach this year will be on a Monday night. And what's the reason? So the rabbis say that there's this deep spiritual reason for this. Maybe if you invite them now, there's a chance they'll show up on time. If you invite them now. And they won't come late. Maybe there's no chance. Okay. So the reason is that the first day of Pesach was the beginning of our redemption, and in Tisha B'Av was the end of our redemption. So therefore, you have the first day of Pesach is also the first day of Tisha B'Av. But it's not the end of the redemption, because we know it's known that we know that right now we're in exile, but we know we'll eventually be redeemed. And the Tisha B'Av, which is the end of the redemption, then the sparks of the holy light were spread throughout the world. So it actually begins the beginning of the redemption. And that's what it means, Aleph Taf. The Taf is the end of the alphabet, and it's connected to the Aleph, which is the beginning of the alphabet. But it is at the same time hidden, and therefore the exile covers over its face, meaning that's why it's the last one. And that's the main concept of the exile, that we don't see the Taf when we're at the Aleph. So that's the whole idea here. It's like a very deep mystical idea that the reason why the first line in Pesach, which is called the Aleph, is the same as the Taf. It's to teach us this idea that we don't see the Taf when we're at the Aleph. When we're at the redemption, we don't see the ultimate exile, but we also don't see when we're being exiled, we don't see the ultimate redemption. We don't see that the exile is actually a form of redemption. It's the form of the sparks going out from the base of Mikdash was destroyed. The sparks went around the world, but eventually that will lead to an even greater redemption. It's only on the Shabbos Kodesh that the light of the exile is opened up and it can return. And so therefore, that's the reason why we don't mourn on Shabbos. The reason why we're not mourning is because on Shabbos, the lights of the exile, the lights to the gates of the exile are opened up, and the light is beginning to shine forth from the exile. And that's the reason why we never mourn on Shabbos. So the Shabbos of Tisha B'Av, we shouldn't see as a Shabbos of darkness, but we should see it as the Shabbos of the beginning of the redemption. And that's why it says in the Gemara in Tainus 29a, it says on the Shabbos of Tisha B'Av, the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av, even though during the week you don't eat meat, but on that Shabbos you should even make a meal like King Solomon when he was in his prime. So the phrase is Mala Shulchanu Afil Kesudas Shlomo B'Shato, even like King Solomon in his time. And the question is, why are we so happy? And what does the phrase mean, like Solomon in his time? It's to teach us that Solomon he was the one who built the temple, and he was the aqueduct that allowed the light to shine forth. And so therefore, when Tisha B'Av comes on Shabbos, we have this light that's coming out actually from the light that was begun with Solomon, and that's coming back into us to rebuild the temple. But the basic idea of these two ideas that we start off by saying is that even though this is a time of tremendous communal mourning, we also have to recognize that the Shabbos is different. The Shabbos is set apart. The Shabbos is not a time of mourning. I think it's a very important lesson for all of us today. If you haven't been paying attention to what I've been saying till now, but I think this is what I think the takeaway lesson is. Now, we in our lives, to cope with, now makes it sound, how am I to say this? Like so many people are going through such a hard time here in Israel, stress, anxiety, that's incredibly intense. How do we deal with it? The way we deal with this incredibly stressful world, incredible anxious world, the way we deal with it is by carving out a spiritual space which we view as distinct from the rest of the week. We view as a spiritual moment that will strengthen us, inspire us, lift us up, and be able to have the strength to deal with it. Now, we have that time, which is above whatever place we're in, whatever moment of anxiety, we can turn the space we're in and the time we're in into a sacred space and make it a space of Shabbos. And then we'll be able to deal with whatever tremendous tension or anxiety we're facing in our lives. That's the message, that even though the 3 weeks and the 9 days are a period of intense mourning, the Shabbos before, that's a time of joy. That's a time of inspiration. That's a time of uplifting. That's the Shabbos of Chazon. Anyway, let me just pause for a second. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to address. Okay, so now we'll say a couple of other things about this before we start. There's just along these lines of what I was saying, it said in the phrase, Misha Nichnasav, when the month of Av enters, Mimatin B'Simcha, we diminish our joy. And the way that's typically understood is like it says when Mishnechnas Adar Marbe Misimcha, when the month of Adar comes, we increase joy, but and when the month of Av enters, we diminish our joy. Matinas Atzoros Besimcha, because the our lives are diminished because of the tremendous mourning that we're in. But there's another phrase here. There's another phrase as well. What's this other phrase mean? It says, in these days, mematin, we limit, meaning to say, we cut out a lot of things, i.e., if you're a meat eater, you cut out meat, but you do it besimcha. You do it with joy. Mematin, we cut out certain things from our life, but we do it with joy, meaning to say, we're not upset to have to do this. We have to do this with joy and with happiness and with appreciation and recognition and gratitude to Hashem. And that's the idea. Now, we begin the book of Devarim. The book of Devarim is not called, by the rabbis, it's usually called not Devarim, but Mishnah Torah. The word Mishnah Torah means like the repetition of the Torah. Because a lot of the book of Devarim is just a repetition of a lot of it, not all of it, obviously. A lot of it is a repetition of the first 4 books of Moses, that Moshe comes along and gives a speech that starts on Rosh Chodesh Shvat and ends, according to Rashi, and ends obviously with his death on the 7th day of Adar. So the idea that comes from the Sfas Emes, the Ger Rebbe, says as follows: that the Sefer that we call Devarim, Mishnah Torah, is basically like, he compares it to the tefillin of the Yad, and the other 4 books are like the tefillin of the head. Let me just stop there and explain what the metaphor. But first, I want to tell you that yesterday I had the opportunity to deal with 4 new Torah scrolls. 4 new Torah scrolls. That Hashem gave me such a merit. How is that possible? Well, in the morning, Baruch Hashem, at 7 a.m. yesterday, I was in Purchase, New York, and I picked up a Torah scroll that I had written, and it still belongs to that person, but he's not using it enough. And he wants us to use it every day. So we're going to use this Torah 4 times a week. So I drove that back to the yeshiva. That was the Torah I wrote a year ago. Then I did, I went and picked up the Torah scroll that I wrote for my friend Meital. I started with her husband David. I started with him on August 23rd, 2023. And now that Torah is completed. I picked that up. And I ordered a new parchment to write a new Torah scroll to 62 pages. And then I also dropped off 40% of the Torah scroll that I'm writing now. I mean, say I'm completed 40%. So I dealt with 4 new Torah scrolls. What a geschmack day it was yesterday in Williamsburg. And today, when we opened up the daf, we saw the following halach. I'm going on a tangent here, but I'm going to share with you because it was very moving to me and very powerful. The daf Yomi said, let's say a person says, I'm going to give my money to the poor people of the city. And then there's a legal dispute. Who's the actual poor person of the city who gets this money? So under those circumstances, that you have to bring in the judges from another town to judge a case. Gemara says, well, he said the poor people. Why can't you just say, find judges who aren't poor? What do you mean? Why do you say every person who's a judge there is poor, that they have to recuse themselves? The Gemara says, no, he doesn't mean, when it says the poor people, it doesn't mean the poor. It means whoever does not own a Torah scroll. It means he was donating a Torah scroll to the town, and therefore, whoever does not have a Torah scroll is considered to be the poor. So he says, well, why does it mean a Torah scroll if it says the poor? And this is the punchline, says the Gemara, Hakol Eitzel Sefer Torah Aniyim Him. The Gemara says everybody vis-a-vis a Torah scroll is considered to be poor. What does that mean? That anybody who doesn't have the Torah scroll, doesn't own a Torah scroll, is poor. Obviously, I grew up, I didn't own a Torah scroll. I didn't feel poor. We weren't rich, but I mean, we had everything we wanted in life, but we didn't have a Torah scroll. But what I think it means is that of all the possessions a person can possibly have, the one that there's a commandment to have, the only one that there's a commandment to own is a Torah scroll. Try and think of another possession you're commanded to own. There's no other possession that you're commanded to own other than a Torah scroll. You can do the lulav and the esrog. The first day you shake the lulav and the esrog, it's supposed to be yours, but that you can just be given it by somebody else. But the Torah scroll is the only one you're commanded to write and to own. It's the only one. And so the Talmud was saying that if you can have all the possessions in the world, but if you don't have that, then you're considered to be lacking. That's what the Talmudic statement is. Okay, so now we come back to the words. And by the way, what's the power of the Torah scroll? The power of the Torah scroll is the idea that if you have it, this is what the Sefer Chinuch says. The reason is you have it in your home, then it's just around you, and it impacts the way you study, the way you eat, the way you live. It just impacts you. You know, almost like Lahavdil, to make 1,000,000,001 distinctions. It's almost like, let's say you have a fire alarm, an HVAC system, a heating system, electric system. You can't have a house without that. You can't have a house without the kedusha, the holiness of the Torah. I think that's what the lesson is. Okay, so now back to what the Ger Rebbe was saying. He says the Mishnah Torah is like the tefillin of the hand, and the other 4 books of the Torah, i.e. in the head, are like the tefillin of the head. Meaning to say, because the tefillin of the hand, the tefillin, they looks to the outside like a box, and the rosh has a box. But if you notice, the rosh has lines on that tefillin of the head, and the tefillin of the hand has no box. Has no lines. It's just one big box. Or, I don't know if it's big, but no lines around it. So what's the thinking behind that? The tefillin of the hand are all written on one piece of parchment, whereas the tefillin of the head are written on 4 separate pieces of parchment. So therefore, the 4 books of the Torah are different or set apart than the fifth book, which is Deuteronomy, or what he calls Mishnah Torah. Deuteronomy is really a translation of the words Mishnah Torah, a second Torah. And there is a distinction between them, says the Ger Rebbe. One is the tefillin of the head, which is about the head, about thinking, and the other is the tefillin of the hand, which is about the heart, which I'm saying is about the emotion. So therefore, it says the Ger Rebbe that even though the Mishnah Torah has everything, the Devarim, the Deuteronomy has everything that was in the other 4 books, it's different. Just like the tefillin of the hand has the same passages in it as the tefillin of the head. Nevertheless, there's a fundamental difference. And therefore, this book, Mishnah Torah, is called Devarim, words, meaning to say, these are words of rebuke, that their purpose is to bind the Jewish people to the Torah. Just like the tefillin of the head the tefillin of the hand is about the heart, the emotion. This book, Devarim, is about words of rebuke that Moshe is giving to bind us, our hearts, closer to God. Just like the word to bind is likshor, and the word for hearts is levot. Or levavot. So to bind the libot, the hearts of the children of Israel to the Torah, just like the tefillin of the hand is to bind our hearts to Hashem. And the tefillin of the head is about the brain. And so, indeed, the Talmud says, all the people of the world will see that Hashem has called upon you. That refers to the tefillin of the head. And this is the way that Hashem and the generation of the wilderness was behaving. That they had the revealed miracles. And so when the first 4 books is how we how Hashem engaged with the generation of the wilderness. That was through open miracles, and that's the head. That's the 4 books, and that's the 4 compartments of the tefillin of the head. But Devarim is a speech to the Jewish people when they're about to enter into the land of Israel. And there in Israel, as we're seeing now in Israel, it's not always clear to us. It's all covered up. And there, it's going to be hidden. That's why the tefillin of the head, here's another halacha, the tefillin of the head are not allowed to be covered up. But the tefillin of the hand are supposed to be covered up. You're supposed to cover up the tefillin of the hand. It's the hidden miracles. And then the Ger Rebbe says, I heard, the Sfas Emes says, I heard in the name of my grandfather, the Chidushei Arim, that Bnei Yisrael are closer, we're closer to the words of Devarim. But with the words of Devarim, we connect to the rest of the Torah. It says, Ukshartem Alav Avchem. You bind it on your hearts, and then that at first you connect to Devarim, you connect to the emotion, you connect to the rebuke, and only afterwards can we then appreciate the first 4 books of the Torah, the books of the eyes, of the revealed books of the Torah. So this is the powerful message of the Ger Rebbe and his interpretation of Devarim. So we've discussed so far why it's called Shabbat Chazon, the power of Shabbat Chazon, and we discussed why it's called Mishneh Torah. And now I want to just turn to the first few psukim of Devarim. I want to read these psukim and note that the Vilna Gaon says that the first 5 psukim of the Torah, of Devarim, are really an introduction to the whole book of Devarim. The whole book of Devarim, I think, is 3 speeches of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's split up, but the Vilna Gaon says, like sometimes there's a beginning, sometimes you go to hear a rabbi, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Well, we have a beginning here. The Vilna Gaon says it's the first 5 books of the book. Then there's a middle, and then there's an end. There's clearly an end here where you have the death of Moshe. So let me just read the first 5 psukim, and then I'll show how the Vilna Gaon says that the first 5 psukim represent the entire book. First of all, anybody have any questions? Okay, I see no questions. Okay, Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. All right, so Ela Advarim. These are the words that Moshe spoke. Asher Diber Moshe. Hold on. These are the words that Moshe spoke to all of Israel. I'll call Yisrael be'ever Yarden, on the other side of the Jordan. Bamidbar barava. Mol Suf ben Paran ben Tofel. In the wilderness in the Arava, across from the Suf between Paran and Tofel. Lavan Machatzerot. V'dizav. These are places. Rashi says these are places that are hinting to the tremendous sins that the Jewish people committed in all those places, but Moshe didn't want to rebuke them directly, so it was just allusions to them so as not to embarrass them, teaching us how to properly give rebuke. The second pasuk states, Achad asar yom mechorev derech har seir. These are 11 days from Chorev by path of Mount Seir ad Kadesh Barnea, until Kadesh Barnea. Chorev is another name for Mount Sinai. And it was in the 40th year, and the 11th month, on the first day of the month. Remember, I said that this was the first day of Shvat, so therefore Hashem started speaking to Moshe on the first. Moshe started speaking on the first day of Shvat, and we know that he died on the 7th of Adar. Although there are some who say there's another version that says he died on the 7th of Shvat. There's a version in the Gemara that says that as well. So it was in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month. Iber Moshe b'bnei Yisrael k'chol asher tzivahu Hashem alayim. Then Moshe spoke to the children of Israel like all that God commanded him to them. Achrei hakoso es Sichon melech HaAmori, after he had struck down, after Moshe had struck down Sichon, the king of the Amorites, Asher Yoshev b'Cheshbon, who was dwelling in Cheshbon. Yes, Og Melech Bashan, and Og, the king of Bashan, Asher Yoshev Ashtaroth b'Edrei, who was dwelling in Ashtaroth in Edrei. And then we come to the fifth pasuk. Be'ever Yarden. All this took place on the other side of the Jordan, Me'eretz Moab, on in the land of Moab. Hoil Moshe. Moshe began Be'eretz HaTorah Zot Lemor, to clarify the Torah saying. Before we go to the Vilna Gaon, you just have to say what this means. Be'eretz HaTorah, Rashi says, B'shivim lashon pirsholam. That, and this is such an important idea. If you remember only this, I promise you, I beg you to remember this from today's discussion. What does it mean that Moshe began to explain the Torah? So Rashi says, B'shivim lashon pirsholam. He explained the Torah to them in 70 languages. But this is a very big question I have. What do you mean? Why would he need to explain the Torah to them in 70 languages? This is the Bnei Yisrael. Where are they coming from? They all came from Canaan. Then they all lived in Egypt. And then they all were in the wilderness. They didn't get anybody else. Maybe they got some Arab Rav that joined them from Egypt. Where are they getting the 70 languages? Why does he need to explain the Torah to them in 70 languages? They all speak the same 1, 2, 3 possible languages. So what's the idea that he has to teach it to them are 70 languages? So let me pause here, see if anybody has an answer to this question that I just asked. Again, the question is, my answer, well, first of all, I'll say what Elaine said, what the Sfas Emes said, the name of his grandfather, Chedushi Arim, was that it was setting it up, anticipating future generations would have to know these languages, because they're going to have to, the Torah has to be in other languages so that future generations will be able to understand it. But I thought it was a different answer. I thought it's very clear that the purpose of the Torah is to make the world a better place. And so the Jewish people are just a small little tribe or small little group of people. How many of us are there? 10 million, 15 million, 20 million? Whatever it is, we're nothing. We're not even like a state the size of, we're a middle-sized state in America of 1 of 50, and in the whole world we're just a speck of nobodies. Compare, by numbers we're no one. But of course, the Jewish people's impact has been so great. So what we need to do is recognize that the purpose of the Torah is not just for the Jewish people to be able to understand it, but for it to be a light unto the world, for the world to be transformed by the teachings contained within the Torah. So of course, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to make this Torah available to the whole world. Now, obviously, the whole world has the written Torah, but not the oral Torah. But even the written Torah is essential for it to be out there, for people to understand it. And that's why it says, Rashi says, B'shivim Lashon Pirsholam. He explained it to the Jewish people in 70 languages so that the Jewish people will be able to communicate it with the other nations of the world, so that the other nations of the world would have the essential teachings of the rest of the world, of the Torah. So that's the idea. So the Vilna Gaon, going back to the Vilna Gaon says that these first 5 verses, which we just discussed, they have, I have to say, let me say this, and then I want to say a Dudai Ruvain on this, which is one of my favorite Dudai Ruvains. I want to say after this, one of my favorite Dudai Ruvains. So don't let me go before I say it. Yes. So the Vilna Gaon says like this. He says the first 5 verses are an introduction to the whole book. And 3 times within this first 5 verses, we have the words of Moshe. It says, Asher Diber Moshe, B'ashtei Asar Chodesh, B'chadol Chodesh, Diber Moshe al B'nei Yisrael, and Ho'il Moshe Be'eretz HaTorah Azos. So 3 times we see Moshe speaking. Verse 1, verse 3, and verse 5. Because, says the Vilna Gaon, there are 3 parts of this book. And these 3 parts of this book correspond to Exodus, Leviticus, and Bamidbar. And therefore it's called Mishnah Torah. The first part is from the beginning of the book until Moshe calls all of Israel and gives the 10 Commandments in chapter 5. That's right before the 10 Commandments. And that's the words of rebuke. And that's why they're hinted to. Eila hadvarim, Eila shemos. So that's the hint. They both start with Eila hadvarim and Eila shemos. They both start with the word Eila. The second part is from Vayikra. That's corresponding to Vayikra. And that goes until chapter 27, which is the curses. And chapter 27, verse 9. And it's referring to the commandments of the Torah. And therefore it says, Shema Yisrael mishpatim. Hear the laws. And then there's a third part that begins with chapter 27, verse 9 until the end. And that is also hinted to with Be'erei Tev. That's a hint to the fact that Moshe had to explain the Torah. And that talks about the blessings and the curses. And then and it says Vayidaber Moshe, and that corresponds to Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe. And the Vilna Gaon sees in it the hint to the three separate parts of the Torah. Right? That's the Vilna Gaon seeing this whole in these 5 verses, the hint to the whole Torah. I also want to mention, I don't have the Dudai Reuben in front of me, but it sticks in me like very, very clearly in my mind, and I want to say this. Go to this verse. So if you go to chapter 1, verse 12, you see the following. It says, Moshe Rabbeinu looks out, and Hashem has, actually go back 2 verses, it says, Hashem will bless you and increase you, and behold, you're numerous like the stars of the sky, and you're doing so great. And at that time, Moshe Rabbeinu was saying, I can't do it. I can't. It's too much for me to do it by myself. Well, in Yisro, this conversation is tribute to Yisro, but here Moshe is assumed to have said it himself, and he said, God increased me so much. Hashem it's the blessings of God to come true. I can't do it. And then Moshe says, how can I alone carry these troubles and these burdens? I can't do it by myself. And of course, the custom is to read this verse as though we were reading it to the tune of Eicha Salavadi, to the tune of Eicha. How can I do this by myself? It's too much. And then it goes in the book of Devarim that Moshe Rabbeinu is told to separate, wise people and to make it, do delegating it, to make a system of delegating it. So again, this verse, which is read to the tune of Eicha, is said in this manner. So it's said, how can I do this? We've grown too big. We're too great. They're too much of us. So the Midrash says there are three prophets who prophesied using the word Eicha. There are 3 prophets who prophesied using this word Eicha, and that's why we read this into the tune of Eicha, which we're going to read Monday night. Everybody's welcome at the yeshiva. We read it Monday night, or you can come on the Zoom if you can't make it in person, obviously. So, and the 3 prophets are Moshe Rabbeinu, prophesied here, Eicha Salavadi. And then we have Isaiah from this week's Haftorah. Now, what did Isaiah say? Isaiah looks out in our Haftorah from this week, and he looks it out and he says, how can this, he looks out at Jerusalem and he says, how is it going to be destroyed? How can this city, which was a faithful city of Jerusalem, how has it become like a harlot? Milesi mishpat, tzedek yoin ba v'atamar atzlim. It was filled of justice, righteousness was here, but now it's murderers. He looks on the city with disgust. And he looks at the city and he says, this is the city? This is the city that was the most beautiful city that we're waiting for, this city on a hill. And this is the city is now filled with murderers. Your silver has become dross. Your wine is mixed with water. And then there's the third prophet who prophesies with the word Eicha, and that's Jeremiah. Jeremiah, who in our book of Eicha, which is a tribute to Jeremiah, Jeremiah looks at the city of Jerusalem and says, Eicha Yeshva Badad, Ha'ir Abasiyam. How is this city, which was once filled with people, how is it now dwelling by itself? It's just not even possible. So these three Eichas represent the word Eicha is representing this just moan and the groan from these prophets. But ask the Dudai Ruvain, it says no. There's a fundamental difference. There's a fundamental difference between the prophecy of Moshe and the prophecy of Isaiah and Jeremiah. Isaiah and Jeremiah were giving prophecies of doom and destruction. They were looking out at the people, and Jeremiah was seeing the destruction, the physical destruction, and Isaiah was seeing the spiritual destruction. But their prophecies were prophecies of destruction and doom, whereas Moshe Rabbeinu here was not giving a prophecy of destruction and doom. He was giving a prophecy of a tremendous success. He was saying, listen, this city, which had been this nation, we were just a few years ago, 40 years ago, we were slaves in Egypt, and we were being enslaved by Pharaoh, and now all of a sudden we are so great, we're so numerous, we have to have a government, a judicial system. Moshe's prophecy was not a prophecy of doom, it was a prophecy of tremendous success. So why are we reading it in a sad tune? How can I do it? How can I? We're a real country. How can I do this myself? God has increased us by thousands of thousandfold. How can I do this by myself? It's not a prophecy of doom. It's a prophecy of success. He's just here. The word Eicha means something else. It means I can't do it by myself. I can't run it like a shtibel. I have to run it like a government now. So why are we saying that this is a prophecy? Why is the word Eicha being used here? Why is the same word Eicha being used by Moshe Rabbeinu when it's a prophecy of success, when it's also being used by Isaiah and Jeremiah when it's a prophecy of doom? That's the question that Dai Ruvain raises. Let me just pause, see if anybody can answer that. Says the Dudai Ruvain. The Dudai Ruvain says like this. It says the word Eicha is an expression, a shout of disbelief. We don't believe what our eyes are seeing. We don't believe it. It's just too shocking to even imagine. Jeremiah looks at this city. How could this city, which was just filled with everything in the world, filled with weddings and parties, now it's empty? It's just not possible. How can I explain this just overwhelming, jarring flip of what was the reality? To go from just an incredible city to nothing overnight, in a moment. Isaiah looks at the city of Jerusalem, the city of David, the city of Solomon, the city of, supposed to be the city of the Torah, and he sees a city filled with just corrupt murderers. And he says, how is this possible that this is what this city has become? He just looks at it and it's just disbelief. And Moshe Rabbeinu also looks at the city, looks at the people who just a few years ago had been slaves and now has just tremendous success. And he says, I can't even believe it. Eicha, how is this possible? How is this my life? How am I seeing this? It doesn't even make sense to me. Moshe, it's just overwhelming. It's just overwhelming. The Dudai Ruvain says, why do the prophets have to use the same word? Why do they have to use the same word for the success and the failure. For the success that Moshe is seeing and the failure that Jeremiah and Isaiah are seeing. And this is a message that he said, which I studied many years ago for the first time. I never forgot it. It's because he said it's to remind us. Now, what's the Eicha? The Eicha is instant. Like it's almost, it feels instantly. It's never, of course, instantly, but it feels instant. The shift from a feeling of a high to a feeling of a low, or from a feeling of a low to a feeling of a high. That's what Eicha means. It's to remind us. It's to remind us that when we're feeling high, right away it could go, and we'll be feeling low. But also when we're feeling low, in a moment it could be changed. So it could be changed to a moment of just tremendous joy and blessing. And that's why the Tanakh uses the same word to explain overwhelming sudden joy and overwhelming sudden pain, to teach us this lesson, this overwhelming lesson that when we are high, we have to remember that it can all disappear instantly. God forbid, but that we've all seen that. I'm sure anybody who lives long enough has seen that happen to somebody. And when we are low, we should not despair because it could all change instantly. It seems shocking. It seems impossible. How can it change? But it can. And that's the idea of the Eicha being used both by the prophecy of joy of Moshe Rabbeinu and the prophecy of despair of Isaiah, to teach us that it can go in a moment from bad to good and from good to bad. Okay, I see Bruce and April are raising their hands.